Luke Dawson wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and squinted at the setting sun. The Montana sky stretched wide and empty above his farm, painted in soft oranges and purples. Crickets had just begun their evening song, and the air smelled of dry grass and earth. It had been a long day fixing the south fence, and all he wanted was a cold glass of water and maybe a few minutes on the porch before bed. He walked toward the old red barn, boots crunching on the gravel path. The barn had stood on his family's land for over 100 years. It leaned slightly to the left, its wood weathered gray by time and wind, but it still held strong. Luke pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. Dust floated in the last rays of sunlight that slipped through cracks in the walls. The smell of hay, oil, and old leather filled the air. Something moved in the far corner. Luke froze. Not a raccoon. Not a stray dog. This was different. A soft, shuddering breath came from behind a stack of hay bales near the back wall. His hand went to the flashlight clipped to his belt. He didn't reach for his rifle, not yet. Curiosity outweighed caution. "Hello?" he called, voice low, no answer. Just another shaky breath like someone trying not to cry. He took slow steps forward, boots quiet on the packed dirt floor. When he rounded the hay bales, he stopped dead. Curled up in the shadows was a child, but not like any child he'd ever seen. She was small, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with skin that shimmered faintly like moonlight on water. Her hair was silver white, long and tangled, and her eyes, huge and violet, stared up at him with a mix of fear and something else. Hope, maybe. She wore a torn, sleeveless tunic made of a strange, smooth fabric that looked like woven starlight. Thin, glowing lines traced across her arms and legs, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Beside her, wrapped around her like a living blanket, was a creature no bigger than a house cat. It had smooth, dark blue scales, tiny wings folded against its back and eyes that glowed amber. It lifted its head as Luke approached, letting out a low, rumbling sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr. Luke didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched. The girl flinched when he shifted his weight, pressing herself deeper into the hay. Her breath came faster. One of her arms was wrapped tightly around her side, and Luke saw dark, wet patches on her tunic. Blood, but it wasn't red. It shimmered faintly like liquid opal. He took a slow breath and crouched down, keeping his distance. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, voice gentle. She blinked. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, in a voice so soft it was almost lost in the quiet barn, she whispered, "Water?" Luke nodded. "Yeah, I got water." He stood slowly, hands open at his sides so she could see he meant no harm. He walked back to the farmhouse, heart pounding. He filled a clean cup with cool well water and grabbed a thick wool blanket from the linen closet. On second thought, he also took a jar of honey and a loaf of yesterday's bread. When he returned, she hadn't moved. The little creature watched him the whole time, eyes never leaving his face. Luke set the cup down a few feet away and stepped back. "Go ahead," he said. She hesitated, then reached for the cup with trembling fingers. She drank slowly, carefully, like she'd been thirsty for days. When she finished, she set the cup down and looked at him again. "Thank you," she said. Her accent was strange, melodic, like wind through tall grass. "What's your name?" Luke asked. "Elira," she whispered. He nodded. "I'm Luke." She glanced at the creature beside her. "This is Cale." Cale tilted his head, then gave a soft chirp. Luke smiled a little. "Nice to meet you both." He unfolded the blanket and laid it on the ground between them. "You can use this. Stay warm." Elira stared at the blanket like it was a gift from the stars. Then slowly she pulled it over her shoulders. Cale nestled against her chest, tucking his wings in tight. Luke sat down on an old crate a few yards away, giving her space. "Where'd you come from, Elira?" She looked down, fingers tracing the glowing lines on her arm. "Far away." Beyond the sky. Luke didn't laugh. He didn't ask if she meant another planet, or if she was just confused. Something in her eyes told him she was telling the truth. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She nodded. "The Vorath. They came, my home." "Gone." Her voice cracked. Luke didn't know what a Vorath was, but he knew loss. He'd lost his parents young. He knew what it felt like to be alone in the dark. "You're safe here," he said. "No one's gonna find you." She looked up at him, violet eyes wide. "Why help me?" Luke thought about that for a moment. "Because you needed it." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out with one small hand and touched the edge of the blanket. Your world. It feels quiet, soft. It's just a farm, Luke said. Not much to it. To me, she said softly, it feels like kindness. They sat in silence for a while. The sun dipped below the horizon and the barn grew darker. Luke lit an old oil lamp and set it near the door so it wouldn't scare her. Can I ask, what is Kale? Luke finally said. Elira stroked the creature's head. He is my guardian, a dragon. Young but strong, starborn. Luke raised an eyebrow. A dragon? Kale lifted his head and gave a tiny puff of smoke, no bigger than a candle's breath. But it smelled like ozone and warm stone. Luke chuckled. Well, I'll be darned. Elira managed a small smile. It lit up her whole face. Over the next hour, she told him bits and pieces. Her people, the Silthari, lived on a world of floating islands and singing trees. They were keepers of ancient knowledge, protectors of balance. But the Vorath, cold, endless machines, came without warning. They tore through her world like fire through dry grass. She escaped in a small pod, Kyle with her, and crashed somewhere in these hills days ago. She'd been hiding, too weak to go far, too scared to trust anyone. Luke listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood and walked to the barn door. I'll bring you some food, he said, and clean bandages. You need rest. She nodded, eyes already heavy. Back in the house, Luke moved quietly. He boiled water, cleaned some old cloths, and made a simple meal. Bread, cheese, apples, and a little broth. He didn't tell anyone. Not his neighbor, not the sheriff. This was between him and the girl in the barn. When he returned, Elira was half asleep. Kale curled against her like a living pillow. Luke set the food down gently and laid out the bandages. Let me see your side, he said. She hesitated, then lifted the edge of her tunic. The wound was deep, lined with those strange glowing veins. It didn't look infected, but it wasn't healing right. Luke cleaned it as gently as he could. Elira winced but didn't make a sound. When he finished, he wrapped it in clean cloth. You're tougher than you look, he said. She gave him a tired smile. So are you. He stayed until she fell asleep, Kyle's soft breathing the only sound in the barn. Then Luke pulled the barn door almost closed, leaving just enough space for air. He walked back to the house under a sky full of stars. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know who or what was looking for her. But tonight, in his old red barn, a wounded alien child and her dragon were safe. And that was enough. Luke sat on the porch steps, staring up at the stars. For the first time in years, the quiet felt different, not lonely, full of something new, something important. He sipped his water and smiled. Somewhere out there, among all those lights, a whole world had ended. But here, on this patch of earth, a new story had just begun. And it started with a farmer who chose kindness over fear. Days passed like slow-moving clouds over Luke's farm. He kept Elira and Kale hidden in the barn, bringing them food, clean water, and fresh bandages each morning and evening. The girl grew stronger. The glowing lines on her skin dimmed, and she began to walk without wincing. Kale, too, changed. His scales darkened to a deep cobalt, and his wings stretched a little more each day. He followed Elira like a shadow, sometimes perching on her shoulder, sometimes curling at her feet like a loyal dog. Luke noticed other things, too. The chicken stopped laying eggs for 2 mornings in a row. His old radio crackled with static even when turned off. One night, the tractor's engine turned over by itself, though the keys were hanging on a hook inside the house. He said nothing to Elira about it, but he watched her more closely. She spent hours sitting in the hayloft, staring at the stars through a gap in the roof. Sometimes she whispered words Luke didn't understand, soft flowing sounds that made the air hum. Kale would lift his head, eyes glowing brighter as if listening to something far away. One afternoon, while mending a fence post, Luke saw a black SUV roll down the dirt road. It wasn't local. No dust on the tires, too clean, too quiet. It slowed near his mailbox but didn't stop. Just kept going, disappearing around the bend. Luke's stomach tightened. He'd seen that kind of car before, on the news near military bases, near places where strange things happened. That night, he brought Elira a bowl of stew and sat with her in the barn. Did you hear anything odd today? He asked. She looked up from feeding Kale bits of cooked carrot. The sky is watching, she said quietly. What do you mean? She pointed upward. Ships not like yours, silent, hungry. Luke frowned. Are they looking for you? She nodded. The Vorath leave traces, like smoke in the wind. Others follow the smoke. Others? Luke asked. Not all who hunt are enemies, she said. But not all who help are friends. The next morning, 2 men in dark suits showed up at his door. They wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky. One held a badge. Mr. Dawson, the taller one said. We're with the Department of Atmospheric Research. We've been tracking unusual energy readings in this area. Mind if we take a look around? Luke leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. This is private land. Of course, the man said smoothly. But national security is involved. We just need to check your barn. Routine sweep. Luke's heart pounded, but his voice stayed calm. Barn's full of hay, tools, and old junk. Nothing unusual. The second man stepped forward. We have authorization. Luke didn't move. Then get a warrant. The men exchanged glances. The taller one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We'll be back. They left, but Luke knew they wouldn't stay gone long. That evening, he told Elira everything. She listened without speaking, her violet eyes distant. When he finished, she stood and walked to the center of the barn. Kale leapt down from the hayloft and stood beside her. They are not Vorath, she said, but they serve those who fear what they do not understand. They will take me, study me. Cage Kale. Luke swallowed. What do we do? Elira turned to him. You have been kind, but kindness is not enough now. We must leave. Where will you go? Nowhere far, she said. But somewhere they will not look, Luke thought fast. His cousin owned an old hunting cabin deep in the Bitterroot Mountains, miles from the nearest road. No cell service, no power lines, just trees and silence. I know a place, he said. They left that night under a moonless sky. Luke packed a rucksack with food, blankets, a first aid kit, and his grandfather's hunting knife. Elira wore one of his old flannel shirts over her tunic. It hung loose on her small frame, but she didn't complain. Kale rode in a canvas bag with air holes, peeking out every few minutes with wide, alert eyes. They walked for hours, following dry creek beds and deer trails to avoid roads. The air grew colder, the trees taller. By dawn, they reached the cabin, a small log structure half hidden by pines. It smelled of dust and pine resin, but the roof held and the door still locked. Inside, Luke lit a kerosene lamp. The room was simple. A wood stove, a cot, a table, and shelves lined with old cans of beans and peaches. Elira sank onto the cot, exhausted. Kale crawled into her lap and let out a soft sigh. For 2 days, they stayed hidden. Luke hunted rabbits, boiled water, and kept the fire low. Elira rested, but her eyes never lost their sharpness. She often stood by the window watching the sky. On the third night, the silence broke. A low hum filled the air, not from the wind, not from any animal. It vibrated in Luke's bones. He stepped outside and looked up. 3 lights hovered above the treetops. Not planes, not helicopters. They moved without sound, shifting in perfect formation. Then one by one they vanished. Luke ran back inside. They found us. Elira was already on her feet. Not them, others. Before Luke could ask who, Kale let out a sharp hiss. His scales rippled and his eyes blazed like twin suns. Outside, something crashed through the underbrush. Luke grabbed his rifle, not to shoot, but to feel ready. The door burst open, but it wasn't soldiers. A figure stood in the doorway, tall, cloaked in gray fabric that shimmered like fog. Beneath the hood was a face like Elira's, but older, sharper. Silver hair tied back, violet eyes narrowed. Elira, the stranger said, voice low and urgent. You must come now, Elira stepped forward. Malin? The stranger nodded. The Vorath have awakened a beacon on your crash site. They are calling their fleet. Earth will burn if you do not act. Luke stepped between them. Who are you? Malin's gaze flicked to him. I am of the Silthari, and you? You are the human who sheltered our air. For that, I owe you my life. Elira turned to Luke. Malin is my teacher. He escaped the fall of our world. Luke lowered his rifle slightly. What do you want with her? To protect her, Malin said. And to prepare her. The Heartstone is here, Luke Dawson. Buried beneath your world. It sleeps, but it knows her blood. She must wake it before the Vorath do. Luke looked at Elira. Is that true? She nodded. The Heartstone is the core of our old alliance with Earth's first children. It can shield this world. Or destroy it, Malin stepped closer. We have a ship hidden in the canyon west of here. We can leave tonight. Take her to safety. Elira shook her head. No, I will not run again. If the Heartstone is here, then this world is part of my duty. I stay. Malin's face tightened, but he bowed his head. Then I stay with you. Luke exhaled slowly. He looked at the cabin, at the woods, at the sky full of unseen dangers. He thought of his quiet farm, his empty porch, his simple life. That life was over. He turned to Elira. What do you need me to do? Her eyes softened. Stand with us. Kale leapt onto Luke's shoulder, claws gentle on his flannel shirt. The little dragon nuzzled his cheek, a warm, rumbling purr vibrating through Luke's chest. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere far away, a wolf howled. But Luke didn't feel afraid. He felt ready. The next morning, they left the cabin before sunrise. Malin led them through narrow mountain passes, moving with a grace that seemed to bend the shadows around him. Elira walked beside Luke, her steps sure now, her voice calm. The Vorath do not feel fear, she said as they climbed a rocky ridge. They do not hate. They simply consume. To them, life is fuel. Stars are batteries. Worlds are raw material. Why Earth? Luke asked. Because we came here, she said. Our trail led them. And because Earth holds the Heartstone, the last key to the old galactic shield. They reached the canyon by midday. Hidden behind a waterfall was a sleek silver craft no bigger than a pickup truck. It hummed softly, its surface shifting like liquid metal. Malin opened the hatch. We go to Nevada. To the Black Rock site. The Heartstone signal is strongest there. Luke hesitated. That's government land. Full of eyes, Malin smiled faintly. Not for us. Inside the ship there were no seats, no controls. The floor glowed beneath their feet. As the hatch closed, the ship rose silently into the sky, faster than any bird. Luke gripped the wall, heart racing. Below, the mountain shrank into green and brown patches. Clouds parted like curtains. Elira stood at the front, hands pressed to the transparent wall. Kale sat on her shoulder, wings half spread. We are not alone in this fight, she said, more to herself than to Luke. The stars remember kindness too. Hours later, the ship descended over a vast desert. Dry lake beds stretched for miles, cracked and white under the sun. In the distance, fences, antennas, and low buildings marked a restricted zone. Malin landed the ship in a dry wash, hidden by mesquite bushes. We go on foot from here, he said. As they walked toward the perimeter fence, Luke noticed something strange. The air felt heavy, charged like before a storm. The ground beneath his boots seemed to pulse faintly. Elira stopped suddenly. It's here, she whispered. Beneath the sand, something ancient slept, and it knew she had returned. Luke looked at the distant guard towers, the motion sensors, the cameras. He knew they couldn't just walk in, but he also knew they had no choice. He turned to Elira. Tell me what to do. She took his hand. Her skin was cool, but her grip was strong. Be brave, she said, and trust Kale. The little dragon leapt from her shoulder and landed on Luke's. His eyes glowed brighter than ever. Above them, the sky darkened, not from clouds but from something descending. Silent, vast, hungry, the Vorath had arrived. The desert air turned cold in an instant. No wind, no sound, just a deep, unnatural silence that pressed against Luke's ears like cotton. Above, the sky darkened not with clouds but with something smooth and black, stretching across the horizon like a living shadow. It had no edges, no lights, no shape he could name. It simply was, and it was watching. Elira's hand tightened around his. They feel the Heartstone, she whispered. They know she is near. Malin pulled them behind a cluster of rocks. We must move now. But it was too late. From the black mass above, thin tendrils of silver light dropped toward the ground, silent, swift, like spider silk falling from the sky. Where they touched the earth, the sand turned to glass. Small animals froze mid-step, then crumbled into dust. Luke's breath caught in his throat. What are those? Harvesters, Malin said grimly. They drain life. Not just bodies, memories, thoughts, even time itself. Kyle let out a low growl, his tiny body trembling with heat. His scales began to glow from within, pulsing like a heartbeat made of fire. Elira turned to Luke, her violet eyes wide with urgency. Kale must change, but he is young. It will hurt him, and it will draw their full attention. Luke looked at the little dragon on his shoulder. Do it, Elira nodded. She placed both hands on Kale's back and spoke words that sounded like wind through ancient trees. The air around them shimmered. The ground shook. Kyle screamed. It was not a sound any animal should make, deep, echoing, full of stars and sorrow. His body swelled, bones cracking and reforming, wings tearing through the air like sails catching a cosmic wind. Blue scales turned to molten gold, then hardened into armor that gleamed like polished obsidian. His eyes blazed with white fire. In seconds, the house cat-sized creature became a dragon the size of a pickup truck, crouched low in the desert wash, smoke curling from his nostrils. The black sky above rippled. The Vorath had noticed. Malin grabbed Luke's arm. Run to the fence. The Heartstone's chamber is beneath the main hangar. Luke didn't argue. He sprinted, boots kicking up dust, heart hammering. Elira ran beside him, her silver hair flying behind her. Kale rose into the air with a thunderous beat of his wings, circling above like a guardian star. Alarms blared in the distance. Floodlights snapped on. Men in uniforms poured from buildings, shouting into radios. But they weren't looking at Luke, they were staring at the sky, at the impossible shape of the dragon, at the black void swallowing the stars. One soldier raised a rifle. "No," Luke shouted. "Don't shoot. He's on our side." The man hesitated just long enough for Kale to roar. The sound wasn't loud. It was deeper than sound. It made the ground crack and the lights flicker. The soldiers dropped to their knees, hands over their ears. Luke and Elira reached the fence. Malin was already there, pressing his palm against the metal. The fence dissolved into mist where he touched it. Inside, the base was chaos. Vehicles skidded to stops. Scientists ran with laptops clutched to their chests. No one noticed the three figures slipping through the shadows toward the largest hangar. A low, windowless building marked with faded red letters. They slipped inside. The hangar was empty except for a massive metal disc set into the floor, covered in symbols that glowed faintly blue. The Heartstone, Elira breathed. She stepped forward, but Malin held her back. "Wait, the Vorath will try to claim it first. They always send a core." As if on cue, the ceiling above them split open, not with an explosion, with silence. A sphere of pure black dropped through the gap, hovering a foot above the disc. It pulsed slowly like a heart made of void. "The core," Malin whispered. "It carries the hive mind." Elira stepped forward, hands raised. "This world is under my protection." The core did not speak. It simply reached out with tendrils of darkness, trying to sink into the Heartstone. Kale crashed through the roof. Stone and steel rained down as the dragon landed between Elira and the core. He roared again, and this time fire erupted from his mouth, not orange flame, but white-hot starfire that burned without smoke. The core recoiled, its tendrils sizzling, but it wasn't enough. The core split into dozens of smaller spheres, each darting toward the Heartstone from different angles. Malin raised his hands. Light poured from his fingertips, forming a shimmering barrier. "Luke, help her reach the center. I will hold them." Luke didn't understand how, but he knew what to do. He grabbed Elira's hand and ran toward the disc. The ground beneath them hummed. The symbols flared brighter. As they reached the center, the Heartstone rose from the floor, a crystal the size of a human heart, glowing with soft golden light. It floated toward Elira as if recognizing her. She touched it. Light exploded outward, not blinding. Not violent, but deep, warm, alive. It filled the hangar, then spilled out into the desert, racing across the land like dawn chasing night. Where it touched, the glassed sand turned back to earth. Dead plants sprouted green shoots. The soldiers outside blinked, confused, as if waking from a dream. Above, the black sky shuddered. The Vorath core shrieked, a sound that wasn't sound, but a feeling of pure hunger and rage. It lunged for Elira. Kale intercepted it mid-air. Dragon and void collided in a burst of light and shadow. Kale's scales cracked. Smoke poured from his wounds. But he held on, jaws clamped around the core, wings beating furiously. "Now," Malin shouted. "Bind it." Elira closed her eyes and pressed both hands to the Heartstone. She began to sing. Her voice was not loud, but it carried through the air like a river through stone. The words were old, older than earth, older than stars. The Heartstone responded, pulsing in time with her song. Golden threads of light shot from it, wrapping around the core, pulling it down. The core fought, twisting, screaming in silence. But the light held. Slowly, it was drawn into the Heartstone, sealed inside like a storm trapped in glass. Cale collapsed to the floor, exhausted. His massive form shrank back to his small cat-like size. He lay still, breathing shallowly. Elira fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. He gave too much. Luke knelt beside her. Is he? He lives, Malin said, placing a hand on Cale's head. But he will sleep for a time. The change took more than his body. It took his youth. Outside, the black sky was gone. Stars shone again, clear and bright. Sirens wailed in the distance. Military vehicles approached, lights flashing. Malin stood. We cannot stay. Luke looked at the soldiers gathering at the hangar doors. They'll lock us up. Or worse. Elira stood, clutching the heartstone to her chest. Then we show them the truth. She walked to the entrance and raised the crystal high. Golden light poured from it, washing over the soldiers, the scientists, the entire base. In that light, they saw things. Images, feelings, memories not their own. They saw the fall of the Silthari world. They saw the Vorath consuming star after star. They saw Luke offering water to a wounded child in a barn. And they understood. The lead officer lowered his weapon. He looked at Elira, then at Luke, and nodded slowly. No words were needed. Malin turned to Luke. You have done more than shelter her. You have awakened Earth's memory. The Heartstone chose you too. Luke shook his head. I just did what felt right. That is why it worked, Elira said softly. They left the base before dawn. The military did not stop them. Some even saluted as they passed. Back in the desert, Malin called the silver ship. It rose from the dunes like a ghost. Inside, Cale lay curled in Elira's lap, breathing slow and steady. The Heartstone rested on the floor, pulsing gently. Luke sat across from them, tired but calm. Where now? He asked. Elira looked out the window at the rising sun. The Vorath will return stronger, but now Earth is ready, and we are not alone. Malin placed a hand on Luke's shoulder. You are Silthari now, in spirit if not in blood. The stars will remember your name. Luke smiled. I'm just a farmer. Elira turned to him, her violet eyes full of warmth. And that is why you saved us all. The ship lifted into the sky, leaving the desert behind. Below, the world slept, unaware of how close it had come to ending. But somewhere in a quiet Montana barn, a new story had begun, and it was only getting started. Weeks passed. The world did not end, but it changed. Quietly at first, then all at once. News reports spoke of strange lights over major cities. Power grids flickered without cause. Animals acted oddly. Birds flying in perfect spirals, whales singing new songs. Scientists argued. Governments stayed silent. But people felt it. A shift in the air. A hum beneath the ground. Like the planet itself was waking up. Luke returned to his farm, but nothing was the same. His barn still stood, his fields still grew wheat, but now he saw things he never noticed before. Tiny pulses of light in the soil, whispers in the wind that sounded almost like words. And every night Cale, still small, still healing, would sit on the roof, eyes fixed on the stars, as if listening to a call only he could hear. Elira and Malin stayed hidden in the mountains, working with the Heartstone. They sent messages through Cale, thoughts, images, warnings. The Vorath were coming back, not with scouts this time, with a full hive fleet. A planet eater. A machine the size of a moon that devoured worlds and turned them into more machines. Earth had weeks. Maybe less. Luke knew he couldn't fight that alone. But he also knew he wasn't alone. He started with his neighbors. Old Man Harris, who'd lost his son in a war no one remembered. Maria from the feed store, who kept a shotgun under her counter and a heart bigger than her truck. Teenagers who'd once laughed at UFO stories now stayed up all night watching the skies with binoculars and ham radios. Word spread. Not through news channels, but through whispers, through church basements, through truck stops and diners. People who'd never met began sharing plans, tools, maps. Farmers turned tractors into armored rigs. Mechanics rewired old generators to pulse with strange frequencies Elira described. School teachers taught kids star maps alongside multiplication tables. No one called it an army. They called it the Watch, and Luke was its quiet leader. Then the Vorath arrived. Not with fire or noise. With silence. One morning, every satellite went dark. Phones died. Radios filled with static. In cities, lights went out and never came back on. People panicked at first, but then they remembered the stories. The farmer, the silver girl, the dragon. They did not run. They prepared. Luke stood on his porch watching the horizon. The sky was wrong. Too still. Too dark at noon. Kale landed on his shoulder, stronger now, wings steady. His eyes glowed amber. "They are here," Luke said. Kale chirped softly. Down the road, trucks rolled in, loaded with people, weapons, hope. Maria drove the lead vehicle, her shotgun across her lap. Behind her came Harris in a modified combine, its blades replaced with spinning energy coils based on Siltheri designs. Elira and Malin arrived at dusk, riding a wind that bent the trees without breaking them. Elira carried the Heartstone in a woven satchel. She looked older now, her face sharper, her eyes deeper. The weight of her people rested on her shoulders, but she did not bend. "The Planet Eater is above the atmosphere," Malin said. "It will begin the harvest at dawn." Luke nodded. "Then we fight at night." They gathered in the barn, the same place it all began. Maps covered the walls. Radios crackled with voices from across the country. In Texas, oil workers had rigged drilling rigs to fire sonic pulses into the ground. In Alaska, native elders sang old songs that made the northern lights dance in protective patterns. In Nevada, former soldiers guarded the Heartstone's echo, the energy imprint left behind in the desert. Elira stood in the center. "The Vorath do not understand courage. They do not know sacrifice. They think life is weak because it ends. But that is our strength. We fight because we love what we will lose." Luke looked around at the faces, farmers, teachers, kids, veterans. None of them wore uniforms. None carried fancy weapons. But they stood tall. At midnight, they moved. Luke led a group toward Denver, the city closest to the Planet Eater's projected landing zone. They drove through empty highways, past abandoned cars, under skies that pulsed with unnatural colors. As they neared the city, the air grew thick. Buildings stood dark and hollow. Streetlights flickered with black veins, and in the distance above the skyline hung the machine. It was not a ship. It was a wound in the sky, a sphere of shifting metal and void miles wide, covered in spines that dripped darkness. From it, smaller harvesters dropped like rain, turning parks to glass, rivers to dust. But something was different. Where the harvesters touched the ground, green shoots pushed through. Trees bent but did not break. The planet was fighting back, awakened by the Heartstone, guided by Elira's song. Luke's group set up near the old stadium. Maria aimed a jury-rigged pulse cannon, built from a microwave tower and a car battery, at a cluster of harvesters. Harris drove his combine in circles, the energy coils humming, creating a shield of vibrating air that shattered the machines on contact. Elira stood on the roof of a fire truck, Heartstone in hand. She closed her eyes and sang. The ground trembled. Cracks opened in the streets, not to swallow, but to bloom. Vines shot up, wrapping around harvesters, pulling them underground. The city itself rose to defend its people. Kyle took to the sky, small but bright, weaving between the spines of the Planet Eater. Where he flew, light followed. The machine recoiled, confused. It had never faced life that fought back with roots and songs and stubborn hope. Malin appeared beside Luke, bleeding from a cut on his temple. "The core is inside the sphere. We must reach it. How? The Heartstone can open a path. But someone must carry it into the machine." Luke didn't hesitate. "I'll go." Elira shook her head. "No, it must be me. My blood calls to the core, but I cannot go alone." Luke looked at her. "Then I'm with you." They climbed to the top of the tallest building, a half-finished skyscraper on the edge of downtown. Below, the battle raged. Above, the Planet Eater loomed, its surface rippling like oil. Elira held out her hand. "Trust me." Luke took it. She raised the Heartstone. Light shot upward, piercing the dark sphere. A tunnel of gold opened in the machine's side. Kale landed on Luke's shoulder. Malin nodded once. Together, they stepped into the light. Inside the machine, there was no metal, no wires, only endless corridors of shifting shadow and memory. Faces of consumed worlds flashed on the walls, screaming, silent. The core waited at the center, a pulsing black heart, larger than a house, beating with cold hunger. Elira walked forward, Heartstone glowing in her hands. "You will not take this world." The core did not speak. It reached for her with tendrils of pure void. Luke stepped in front of her. "Over my dead body." The tendril struck him. Pain exploded through his chest, not physical but deeper. It pulled at his memories, his fears, his love for this land. He saw his parents' graves, his empty barn, The first time Elira smiled at him, but he held on, because kindness was not weakness. It was a choice. And he chose to stand. Elira placed a hand on his back. Her song filled the chamber, soft at first, then strong. The heartstone blazed. Kel leapt from Luke's shoulder and flew straight into the core. For a moment everything stopped. Then light erupted. Not from the heartstone, from Kale. The little dragon burned with starfire, his body unraveling into pure energy. He was not dying. He was becoming. The core screamed, a sound of endless hunger meeting endless giving. The machine shuddered. Cracks spread across its surface. Outside, people watched as the planet eater began to fall apart piece by piece, dissolving into stardust. Luke collapsed, gasping. Elira caught him. Kale was gone. But in the sky, a new star appeared, small, bright, constant. Malin helped Luke to his feet. He is not lost. He is the shield now. Dawn broke over Denver. The city stood battered but alive. People walked out of shelters, blinking in the light. They saw farmers beside soldiers, children beside elders, all looking up at the new star. Luke leaned on Elira, weak but smiling. "We did it." She looked at the sky, tears in her eyes. "No, you did it. All of you." Back at the farm, days later, Luke sat on his porch. The world was healing. Power returned. Crops grew faster. Animals were calmer. And every night the new star, Kale's star, shone brighter. Elira stood beside him, the heartstone now quiet in her hands. "What now?" Luke asked. She smiled. "Now we teach them, not to fear the stars, but to protect them." And somewhere in a quiet barn under a sky full of light, a new age began, not with war but with kindness that refused to die. The war was over, but the world would never be the same, not because cities had burned or skies had darkened, but because people had changed. They had stood together when the stars fell silent, and in doing so, they remembered something old and true, that courage lives in quiet hearts, and that kindness can be the strongest weapon of all. Luke Dawson walked his fields at dawn, boots sinking slightly in the damp earth. The wheat stood tall and golden, greener than it had in years. Bees hummed in the clover. Birds sang songs that sounded almost like laughter. And high above, Kale's star shone faintly even in daylight, a small, steady light that never blinked. He stopped at the edge of the property and looked toward the mountains. Elira would be leaving soon. She had told him last night, her voice soft but sure. The Silthari were not all gone. Scattered survivors had answered the Heartstone's call. They waited beyond the rings of Saturn, in hidden ships and forgotten outposts ready to rebuild. And they needed their heir. Luke understood. He did not ask her to stay. Back at the house, the barn door stood open. Inside, Elira packed a simple satchel: bread, dried fruit, a small vial of Montana soil. Malin stood by the door, cloaked in gray, his face calm but his eyes heavy with the weight of what came next. Kale lay curled on a hay bale, smaller than before, his scales dull blue again. He had returned to his young form after the battle, weakened but alive. The star in the sky was his echo, his gift to Earth. But his body remained bound now to two worlds. Elira knelt beside him and stroked his head. "You do not have to come," she whispered. Kyle lifted his head and nuzzled her hand. Then he looked at Luke. Luke crouched down. "You've earned your rest, little friend," Kyle chirped once, a sound full of warmth and goodbye. Malin stepped forward. "The ship is ready. It will take us to the gathering point near Titan. From there, we begin anew." Luke nodded. He had seen the ship the night before, a sleek silver shape resting in the wheat field, humming softly like a lullaby. It left no tracks, made no noise. It simply was. He walked with them to the edge of the field. The morning sun painted everything in gold. Neighbors stood at their fences, not to stare but to honor. Maria held her hat over her heart. Old Man Harris gave a slow, solemn nod. Even the children were quiet, eyes wide with awe. Elira turned to Luke. "You gave me shelter when I had nothing. You gave Earth a chance when it was blind. You are more than a farmer, Luke Dawson. You are a guardian." Luke shook his head. "I just did what felt right." "That is the rarest thing of all," she said. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small crystal, no bigger than a walnut, glowing with a soft inner light. She pressed it into his hand. "This is a seed of the Heartstone. It will not wake unless Earth is in danger again. But it will listen, and if you ever call, we will hear." Luke closed his fingers around it. It was warm, like sunlight held in glass. Malin bowed deeply. The Silthari will sing your name among the stars for 1,000 years. Then he turned and walked toward the ship. Elira lingered a moment longer. She placed a hand on Luke's arm, her violet eyes full of gratitude and something deeper, something like love but older. Quieter. "Thank you," she said. And then she was gone. The ship rose without sound, lifting into the sky like a thought becoming real. It passed through the clouds, then vanished, not with a flash but with a sigh, as if the sky itself had breathed it away. Luke stood alone in the field for a long time. Kyle stayed with him, sitting at his feet, watching the empty sky. Days turned into weeks. Life returned to its rhythm, but with new meaning. People planted gardens with seeds that glowed faintly at night. Children learned to read the stars not just for navigation, but for stories. Radios picked up strange, beautiful music on quiet nights. Songs from far away sent his thanks. Luke kept the crystal in his pocket. He never used it. He never needed to. One evening, as he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, Kyle leapt onto the railing beside him. The little dragon stretched his wings, then looked west, toward the mountains, toward the stars. Luke smiled. "You miss her, don't you?" Kale made a soft rumbling sound, not quite a purr, not quite a sigh. "You can go," Luke said gently. "You belong with her." Kyle turned and looked at him, amber eyes full of understanding. Then he nuzzled Luke's hand one last time. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Kale took flight. Not fast, not far at first. He circled the farm 3 times. Once for the barn, once for the fields, once for the porch where a kind man had offered water to a stranger. Then he rose higher, wings catching the wind, heading west, toward the edge of the world and beyond. Luke watched until the blue shape became a speck, then a star, then nothing at all. He did not feel alone, because Earth was no longer just a rock in the dark. It was part of something larger. A family of worlds, a story still being written. Years later, travelers would come to the farm, not for tours, but for quiet. They said the wheat grew sweeter here, that the wind carried whispers of courage, that if you sat on the porch at dawn and listened closely, you could hear a dragon's song in the rustling leaves. Luke never spoke much about what happened. He fixed fences, fed cows, watched sunsets, but sometimes on clear nights he would stand in the barn doorway and look up at Kale's star, and he would smile. He had found a wounded child in his barn. He had offered kindness, and in return, he had helped save 2 worlds. No medals hung on his wall. No statues stood in his name. But in the hearts of those who knew the truth, Luke Dawson was a hero, not because he fought, but because he cared. And in the end, that was enough. The stars remembered. The earth remembered. And so did he. As long as kindness lived in one human heart, the light would never go out.